What if your closest ancestors ate your grandparents? It's a horrifying question, but one that forces us to look straight into the shadows of our own history. 50,000 years ago, Europe was locked in ice, a world ruled by cold winds, predators, and hunger. In this frozen land, two kinds of humans walked side by side. One would become us, the Cro-Magnon, the early modern humans. The other, the Neanderthals, would vanish forever. But how and why? Were they victims of climate, of competition, or of something far darker? Imagine that ancient world. Firelight flickering against cave walls, the crack of bone echoing through the night. To survive, they're meant to fight not just the beasts of the tundra, but also the cold, the hunger, and sometimes each other. Our ancestors weren't frail wanderers hiding from nature. They were sculpted by it, tall, powerful, carrying brains as large as ours and hearts hardened by endless struggle. This story is not just about bones in caves or DNA in our blood. It's about what it truly meant to be human when survival demanded both compassion and cruelty. Between the lines of history lies a truth that still shapes us. The same hands that painted beauty on stone walls may also have held the knife. Tonight, we return to that world, to the fire, the frost, and the haunting question that lingers in our blood. What really happened between us and them? 50,000 years ago, Europe was not the green continent we know today. It was a land trapped beneath glaciers, a kingdom of wind and silence. Ice stretched across valleys, forests turned to frozen wastelands, and every breath burned like frost. Life clung to the edges, small bands of humans and beasts competing for the same fragile space. In this world, two human kinds endured. The Neanderthals had ruled Europe for over 200,000 years. Stocky, powerful, adapted to cold, they had learned to read the land like hunters born from stone. They mastered fire, carved tools from bone, and hunted giant beasts that roamed the tundra. Then came the newcomers, the Cro-Magnon. They arrived from warmer lands, carrying firelight in their eyes and ideas that would one day reshape the earth. They were taller, their bodies leaner but strong, their minds wired for imagination. Where Neanderthals saw survival, Cro-Magnon saw possibility. They sang, carved, painted, and dreamed. But dreams did not fill bellies. And as the Ice Age deepened, the land could not feed everyone. The cold grew harsher. Herds of reindeer and bison migrated farther south, and food became scarce. Each winter was a battle, each spring a narrow victory. It was no longer a world big enough for two dominant hunters. Across frozen valleys and rivers rimmed with ice, paths began to cross. At first, perhaps, they watched each other from a distance, cautious, curious, sensing kinship, yet feeling threat. Two versions of humanity sharing one unforgiving stage. The glaciers pressed down, the nights stretched longer, and hunger began to whisper. Somewhere amid the snow and silence, competition ignited quiet at first, then louder, as survival demanded more than strength alone. The meeting of Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal was not just chance. It was the spark of an ancient struggle that would decide which kind of human the world would remember. When the first Cro-Magnon hunters entered the valleys once ruled by Neanderthals, the world must have seemed both familiar and strange. They walked the same frozen rivers, stalked the same herds of reindeer and wild horses, and sought warmth in the same limestone caves. Archaeologists at Grotte 60 in southwestern France found bones that tell this mirrored story. Both kinds of humans hunted the same prey, cracked the same marrow-rich bones, and left behind the same ashes. For a time, it was coexistence without understanding. But nature never promised peace. As the winters grew longer and herds moved south, every hunt became a gamble. Cro-Magnon groups, larger in number and quick to adapt, began to spread. Their camps multiplied, their tools sharpened, and their networks stretched across hundreds of miles. They could trade ideas, strategies, and stone blades between distant bands, a web of cooperation that gave them an invisible edge. The Neanderthals, though powerful, lived in smaller, isolated groups. In the deep valleys of Europe, many clans may never have met others of their own kind. Their silence was their weakness. They had endured for millennia through strength, but strength alone was no longer enough. Against a changing climate, and an expanding rival. Every isolated tribe faced growing hunger and shrinking ground. Some encounters may have been tense, quiet standoffs at the edge of hunting grounds. Others might have ended in blood. In those brief moments when paths crossed, a glance through the mist, a stolen kill, a fight for fire or shelter, the future of humanity trembled. Yet even in that rivalry, there was reflection. The Cro-Magnon saw in Neanderthals a version of themselves, older and heavier, shaped by a harsher age. And perhaps the Neanderthal saw in these newcomers a shadow of what would soon replace them. Two species, one destiny, standing face to face as the Ice Age closed its fist. What truly set the Cro-Magnon apart was not just muscle or endurance, but something invisible: connection. While the Neanderthals lived in small, separated clans, the Cro-Magnon built networks that stretched far beyond the horizon. They shared tools, ideas, and even songs carried from valley to valley. A spear point designed in one camp might appear hundreds of miles away in another. This exchange of knowledge became their greatest weapon, a living web of cooperation that kept them adaptable when the world itself was changing. Archaeologists studying Mandarin Cave in France found traces of this difference. The last Neanderthal groups seemed isolated, their tools rarely improved, their numbers thin. The Cro-Magnon, in contrast, thrived through unity. They organized hunts with precision, communicated through gestures, symbols, and perhaps the earliest form of true language. With each generation, their collective memory grew stronger. Knowledge was no longer trapped in a single tribe. It could travel, survive, evolve. Ofer Bar Yosef, one of the great archaeologists of our time, once suggested that innovation, not strength, was the edge that tipped the balance. The Cro-Magnon carried systems as well as spears. They learned to adapt tools from bone, to weave fibers, to store food, and to create shelters that turned survival into strategy. In their fireside gatherings, stories and skills became inheritance. While Neanderthals endured the cold alone, Cro-Magnon learned to face it together. That togetherness forged resilience far deeper than any single weapon. It allowed them to move swiftly into new lands, to outlast storms, and to thrive where others faded. So, when the two species met again in the shadow of the glaciers, it was not brute force that decided fate. It was communication, the unseen bond of cooperation, imagination, and shared purpose. That was the quiet revolution that began to reshape the destiny of humankind. But not every encounter between Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal ended in conflict. In the flicker of firelight, some may have looked across the flames and seen not enemies, but reflections of themselves. The evidence written in our blood proves that their worlds did not just collide, they merged. Genetic studies show that people outside of Africa carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, traces of encounters that happened roughly 45 to 50,000 years ago, somewhere between Europe and the Middle East. These meetings were rare, but powerful enough to leave fingerprints that never faded. The DNA we still carry influences our skin, our immune system, even the way we respond to cold or altitude. Yet not all bloodlines survived. None of the Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line, remains within us. It means that, while fragments of their genes endured, their mothers' voices disappeared forever into the silence of time. Through this genetic blending, Neanderthals were not completely erased. They became a part of us. Their strength, their endurance, their deep adaptation to the cold all folded quietly into modern humanity. Every heartbeat today carries echoes of those ancient unions. So when we talk about extinction, perhaps it is not total loss but transformation. The Neanderthals still live within us, their code intertwined with our own, their story hidden in every cell. What was once two species became one shared legacy. The Cro-Magnon didn't just replace the Neanderthal, they absorbed them. And that absorption, that strange inheritance of bone and memory, would shape the destiny of humankind long after the ice had melted. Even as traces of Neanderthal blood flowed into ours, their bodies began to vanish from the earth. One by one, their fires went out across Europe. The last strongholds, caves in Spain, France, and the Balkans grew cold and empty. But the silence they left behind was not clean. It was scarred with evidence of violence and hunger. In places like Gough's Cave in England and Moulin-Gercy in France, archaeologists uncovered human bones split for marrow, skulls reshaped into drinking cups, and cut marks on ribs and limbs. The precision of those cuts leaves little doubt they were made by human hands. Was it desperation, ritual, or something darker still? The line between survival and symbolism blurred beyond recognition? In El Cidrón, Spain, Neanderthal bones tell the same story. Even they, too, may have consumed their own dead. It reminds us that cannibalism was not merely savagery. In that frozen world, it could be necessity, reverence, or the final proof that hunger can conquer morality. The Ice Age was tightening its grip. Storms grew harsher, food scarcer, and the once mighty Neanderthals dwindled. Disease may have stalked them, or the stress of competition may have broken them from within. Cro-Magnon bands grew larger, more mobile, spreading across the continent with a rhythm of expansion that left little refuge for others. Each generation pushed farther, and each winter claimed more of those who could not adapt. When the last Neanderthal fire flickered out, it wasn't just a species that died, it was a mirror of what we could have been. The bones they left behind whisper of both cruelty and kinship, of a world where humanity's hunger and ingenuity were inseparable. The darkness that consumed them is part of our inheritance, a shadow that still moves quietly beneath our skin. From the ashes of the Ice Age, the Cro-Magnon rose not only as survivors, but as creators. Across Europe, their presence ignited a spark that would never fade. In the caves of Lascaux and Chauvet, they painted animals that seemed to move in the light of torches, mammoths, bison, horses, and the ghosts of their own hunts. These were not mere decorations. They were memories carved in pigment and stone, the first stories ever told. Every brush of ochre, every line of charcoal declared that survival was not enough. Humanity needed meaning. They built shelters that defied the cold, fashioned jewelry from ivory and shells, and created tools of elegance as much as efficiency. These cultures, Aurignacian, Gravettian, Solutrean, Magdalenian, were the fingerprints of progress. The same minds that once sharpened spears began shaping symbols, turning instinct into imagination. For the first time, thought itself became a tool of survival, and yet that beauty was born beside brutality. The same hands that painted life on cave walls had once cracked open bones for marrow. That duality, creation and destruction, compassion and cruelty, became the essence of who we are. The Cro-Magnon carried forward the Neanderthals' strength and endurance, but they also carried the darkness that tested what it means to be human. Today, we still bear the mark of that union, the 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA that hums quietly within our cells. It's a reminder that we are not a clean break from the past, but a continuation of it. Their blood runs with ours. Their failures and triumphs still echo in us. The greatest legacy of those ancient encounters is not just survival, but awareness, that humanity's light has always needed its shadow to shine. So we return to the question that began this journey. What if your closest ancestors ate your grandparents? It sounds unthinkable. Yet within that horror lies the truth of our survival. The path of humanity was never pure. It was carved through blood, ice, and fire. To endure the ancient world meant to do whatever it took to build, to destroy, to love, and sometimes to cross lines that now terrify us. But from that brutal world came the spark of everything we are today. The same species that cracked bones for marrow learned to carve beauty into stone. The same minds that once fought for a meal created art, music, and meaning. We carry both the darkness that kept us alive and the light that made us more than animals. Every heartbeat you feel carries whispers from that age, the courage of the Cro-Magnon, the endurance of the Neanderthal, the hunger and the hope of those who refuse to vanish. Their shadows walk with us still, not as ghosts, but as memory written in flesh. So when you look at your hands, remember they are ancient. They have built fire and spilled blood, painted walls and raised worlds. Humanity's story was never about perfection. It was about becoming 2% Neanderthal, 100% human, and still learning what that truly means.